Last evening, I was at E.J. Thomas at the 25th anniversary celebration of the concert Gospel Meets Symphony. And it was quite a powerful experience, I think, for all of us there. Probably around 2,000 folks, and a real mix of black and white, young and old, different cultures, backgrounds, ages, all coming together in that sense of living the gospel that is called to help us appreciate the beautiful diversity of the human family and how we can come together often united in love. And as I was there, I have to admit that I had all my homily was prepared last night before I went there, but as usual, it changed after I was there. Partially because when I was reflecting for the scripture today, there's that line when Jesus takes Peter, James, and John up, and he's transfigured, and the voice from the cloud, the voice of God says, "This is my beloved Son, listen to him." And so for me, last night at that concert, it really came to okay, Lord, I know you speak in everyday circumstances and in all kinds of events. Here I am. Help me, if you're saying something, to listen to you, what to come out of this. And so for me, in addition to obviously the value of the human family coming together with all our differences in love rather than in fear, also I ended up in conversation with a few folks. That's another way to hear the voice of Jesus to the people around us, especially people who may come from a different background. When I got into the place where I was, there was a whole group of folks there and a real good spirit. And I want to add this to the diversity, too, that it was one of those nights where you had beautiful symphonic music from the orchestra, and you had this lively, vital gospel singing and swaying and praising the Lord from over 50 churches, predominantly black churches in our area. The beautiful thing was with those differences, because too often we can say, well, hey, the way we sing is appropriate, or we like this, we don't like that. We can have different preferences, but to hear each of them, and then especially when they came together and sang, it was so powerful. And it reminded me again of the Lord saying, when we come together, what better music we can make. And so I was there. I also was talking to a few people around me. And there was this woman who was right near me, and we got into conversation. It was a little bit before the performance was to start, and I just asked a little bit about what church she went to and everything, and I said, hey, we're here. Tell me a little about, if you're comfortable. I said, well, she knew I was a priest, would love to hear a little bit about your whole experience of race relations. And wow, did she share a story I didn't expect. She was a little over 80 years old, and she was from Birmingham, Alabama. And at the age of 18, in 1955, in Birmingham, Alabama, Rosa Parks refused to go to the back of the bus. And what started then was a bus boycott by the black community. 2 years almost. And this woman experienced it, that the black folks would not ride the buses. They walked everywhere for just about 2 years until the boycott finally won the day. And they were inspired by a young 26-year-old pastor, Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. So I was just moved by her and hearing her story and being a teenager at that time. And that was the beginning of her deepening racial consciousness. And I asked, I said, well, how have you seen it through the years? And of course she said beautifully, oh, it's much, much better. When I think of what happened back then, the prejudice, the discrimination, the violence, of awful things. She mentioned that when they were there too, how at one time there and other places, those who were trying to have a nonviolent protest were hosed, and there were dogs and everything. She had a lot of stories to tell about her teenage years that woke her up at a young age. But she said, yes, it's been a whole lot better. and she feels positive and good about the direction as a country we're going in. And at the same time, she went on to say, as we talked about, well, how do you feel now? She said, well, she said, I got to tell you, these last couple of years, I have felt that in some way we're going backwards. In some way, she thought, especially with Obama, that, whatever you felt about him, he was a black president, he was chosen by the nation, and she thought, wow, this is good. We're getting to be able to come together. But of course, and we all know, the last couple of years there have been too many racial issues, and you can get a perspective from all dimensions, and it's not just one simple point of view. But she mentioned that she was saddened, but she said in a personal way. She was saddened because her grandson, who himself now was, I guess, 17, 18, remembering her age when she was in Birmingham, and he was feeling pretty negative about white people, from watching the media, from other things. And he said to her, she told me one time, he said, well, all white people are prejudiced. They're all racist. And of course, she spoke to him and said, there are white people that are prejudiced, but not all, hopefully not even most. And she told him, as she was telling me, she said, to her grandson, she said, you're upset about white people being prejudiced. Well, look, how you speak about them and say they're all racist, do you see your prejudice too? Anytime we take a whole group of people and categorize them, that's not good. And she said she talked to him about Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and how even at that time, although there was great division, he was trying to bring all of us together as one. And so, but that's why she was saddened, because the media and the reality of what's happened in the political world and in other parts of our world, that's all he saw and hung on to. Thankfully, he had a grandmother who helped him get a broader, more loving perspective. And then after that, I had an opportunity. There was a little getting together some people from the 25 years who had been part of this movement for this concert. And they asked me to do a prayer at a special service after the concert. And that meant a lot to me. I was there at the first one 25 years ago, and I have been at several through that. But there again, a number of people, I was talking with a lot of black ministers. And we were talking about, some of them have done things in the churches and everything, but saying, they said, unfortunately, in the last few years, this is getting more difficult. And the reality of bringing people together. What we mentioned, and this is so important on any level, in bringing people together of different races or different backgrounds or different political points of view, whatever, that what needs to happen is both a sense of being respectful and candid and open and seeking understanding, and at the same time, though, be honest about one's feelings. Not in a judgmental way, but feelings, and not, if I say this, how's that race going to look at me, or vice versa. So the ability to be both candid and considerate about important points that we need to talk about as a nation, we were all saying there's somewhat of a struggle. We all talked about how faith and the gospel, all sharing the Christian faith, needs to be our foundation to help us. And then, not right then, but when I came home last night and reflected and said, well, God, I guess I'm doing a whole different homily, I kind of listened and thought, the context of that transfiguration story before he took me, Peter, James, and John up the mountain. Right before that, in the beginning of his ministry, he talked about preaching and healing and inspiring people and guiding. But right before this passage, he tells the disciples, hey, we're going to Jerusalem, and there I'm going to be rejected, crucified, and eventually raised up. And then he went on to say, and you too are going to need to take up your cross and follow me. Your cross of loving even when it's difficult, loving even when it calls for sacrifice, loving even though you don't want to go there, just leave me alone. And of course, they were taken aback, and they were, this is too difficult, this gospel stuff. And you're saying this is how it might end up? And that's why he took them up to the mountain to pray. to pray and try to develop an inner reality, an inner strength, an inner peace, an inner hope through whatever happens, including even betrayal and crucifixion. And of course that's where God does say to them, after Moses and Elijah appear, and part of the reason Moses and Elijah appear is to say to them, hey, this Jesus, who you're starting to doubt now, wonder if you want to follow him, he's the real deal. He is the one that Moses and Elijah and all the prophets in the Hebrew Scriptures pointed to. This is him. And then, obviously, hearing that voice say, this is my beloved Son, listen to him. In other words, listen to him, not just when he said wonderful, inspiring, encouraging messages. That's part of the faith. But listen to him when he speaks challenges and says, loving can be difficult. You get hurt. You can get kicked in. Any number of things could happen, but love anyway. That was the basic message. And we, when I think about it, that's with the ministers we were basically talking about. This is difficult, but do it anyway. And so, again, you may know we have the various commissions that are going on in the parish. And one of our long-term goals, we have some other things coming up sooner, but is this whole issue of race relations. You know and I know, this parish sits in a community that has a heavily black population. And many different churches. I've been to a couple of them, and even with those ministers said, you know what, somewhere, somehow, someday, we need to come together and yet conversation to better understand each other's story, each other's feelings. So it's not just only a matter of addressing issues in a policy in our nation. That's an important part of it. But also, just like with that 80-year-old woman, to hear each other's story, each other's experience, and out of that be drawn closer together. And out of that, even though it's very difficult to talk about race, and stand up against all kinds of prejudice and all kinds of discrimination, we're still to do it anyway. And I look back, and it's interesting, that second reading line, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s favorite words, if God is for us, who can be against us? Making that point. Not that people can't get hurt, and he was assassinated, but his point, and he said it often, if God is for us, who can be against us? Ultimately, the way of justice and reconciliation and healing and coming together. Ultimately, it may take years, decades, or centuries, but ultimately God is for us, and that will happen. Sin and prejudice and discrimination will never have the final say. And for all of us who want that kind of vision of our planet and a human family, that we all do our part to make a difference. And even if we don't see the huge difference, like this 80-year-old woman, she said, I'm still praying. I still know it's getting better. And she said, every week at church, we pray that our nation and world can see each other as brothers and sisters. We can pray that prayer too. Just take a quiet moment and know someday in the future we'll be doing some opportunity that brings us together in love. God bless you.